Hello grade 7, I hope you're doing well. For me right now, it is Wednesday evening as I'm recording this. I just got back from a bike ride. It was a beautiful weather outside today. I hope that you guys have been having time to enjoy the beautiful weather because it looks like Thursday is not going to be the nicest, but I'm thankful that so far the spring hasn't been too rainy. All right, so today is the first part of our review lesson for math. We're going to talk about, I'm going to try and do an addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division equation, most of it using algebra. So we're heading back already to some things that we worked on at the beginning of this unit with adding and subtracting negative fractions. So I'm going to go through it step by step. Again, the trickiest thing about this unit is that there are so many places where you can make a mistake. So when you're doing your math work through it very carefully. So here I have -4/5 subtract -3 1/3. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to do anything with the 4/5 to start. I'm just going to write -4/5. Then I remember to myself, I can do leave, switch, switch. So when I want to subtract a negative, instead I can add the opposite. So I'm going to add 3 1/3. But then I remember that when I'm working with a mixed number, I have to make it an improper fraction. So while I'm at it on this line, I might as well do that. So I do 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So I get -4/5 plus 10/3. Now the next thing I need to do when I'm adding fractions, I need to make sure they have the same denominator. So I think about 5 and 3, and I know that they both fit into 15. So my first one's going to become 15ths. How did I go from 5 to 15? Well, I multiplied by 3. So what I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So 4 times 3 is 12. Don't forget to bring the negative with it. So I have -12/15 plus, how did I go from 3 to 15? I multiplied by 5. So then I have 50/15. Now remember, when you are working with a positive number and a negative number, what you do to add them is you actually find the difference between them. So I'm actually going to find the difference between 50 and 12. And the difference between 50 and 12 is 38. So my answer is actually 38/15. Now I have to stop and ask myself, is it positive or is it negative? Well, if I look at my original fraction, I have a negative and a positive. Which one had the greater absolute value? The 50 has the greater absolute value and it's positive, so my overall answer is positive. Now, of course, I can simplify. So I think to myself, how many times does 15 fit into 38? Well, I know 2 times 15 is 30, and then I have 8 leftover pieces of my pizza, so I have 8/15. So there's an example of a subtraction problem. Now let's move on to a question. Oh, I forgot to highlight, by the way, grade 7, I'm taking questions right out of your textbook to give you examples for each section that you're working on. So now let's do a question. We're working with algebra. So we need to solve for the letter P. Now again, a lot of us prefer when our algebraic equations are set up like this, P plus -1 3/8. Feel free to switch it around, okay? Now, I'm adding -1 3/8. So to do the opposite of that, I need to subtract. Now be careful. I'm subtracting -1 3/8. So make sure on this side, you also subtract that negative, okay? You're not adding yet, you're subtracting that negative. The negative stays with the 1 3/8. Well, it doesn't really look like a 3, but you know what I mean. So now we can simplify it because these guys cancel each other out. So I get P equals -9 2/3. Well, let's do the next step of making our mixed number into an improper fraction. So I think to myself, 3 times 9 is 27. And then 27 plus 2, I get, I get 29/3, which by the way is still negative. Always look back for that negative. Then my 1 3/8, I go 8 times 1 is 8 plus 3, and I get 11/8. Then I reminded myself, well, it was negative, but remember, when I want to subtract a negative, I'm going to add the opposite. So what I'm actually going to do is do that right now, add the opposite. I'm adding a positive. So once again, I have a negative and I have a positive. So I need to find the difference between those two numbers. But before I can do that, there's one more step. Notice that my numbers, my denominators, are still different. So I actually need to adapt those and put them into the same denominator. So I go through my 8 times tables and I think to myself, well, I can make them both out of 24. Now these are a little bit larger numbers than we're used to working with, but that's okay. 8 times what is 24? Well, 8 times 3, which you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So I get 33 24ths. Now, over here, 3 times what is 24? 3 times 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do that over here. I'm going to do 29 times 8. So I get 72. 2 times 8 is 16. I add 7 to that, and I get 232. Don't forget that this is still negative. Let me give myself a little bit more space to work with. Now over here, I find the difference between these two numbers. The difference between 232 and 33. Now this I can do mentally in my head, because if it was 233 and took away 33, it'd be 200. So I know the answer is 199. So I have 199 24ths. But again, go back. Is it positive or is it negative? Well, which one had the greater absolute value? The negative number. So that means my answer is negative. Now we're still not quite done because it's not in the simplest form. How many times does 24 fit into 199? I think to myself, I think about quarters. Let's think of 25 cents. And I kind of round it in my head. And I think, well, if I had 25 cents, how many times would 25 cents fit into 200? Well, it fits in 8 times. So let me try that. Let me try 8 times 24. Again, I can do it in my head. I can think 8 times 2 is 16, so 160. And 8 times 4 is 32. Add those together, and I get 192 with 7 leftovers. So my final answer is I have 8 as my whole number, 7 leftover pieces. What kind of pieces are they? They're 24ths. Go back and double check. Wait, I was working with negative numbers. So my answer is -8 and 7/24. It's a lot of steps, but it's combining all things we have learned so far. All right, now let's go on to multiplication and division. We like it a little bit better because we don't really need to worry about the denominators. So the first step is I'm going to put these numbers into improper fractions. So I go 5 times 8 is 40 plus 5. I get -45/8 divided by 7 times 5 is 35 plus 1, and I get 36/5. Next step when you're dividing with fractions is you multiply by the reciprocal. Make sure you do both steps at once. So if you switch it to multiplying, you need to switch to the reciprocal. Now let's do some cross canceling so I don't end up with huge numbers. So if I think carefully, 36 and 49 can both be divided actually by 9. So I get -5 over here, and then I get 36 divided by 9 is 4 over here. Makes it a little bit easier. I multiply my tops, so I get -25. But as I think about my negatives, I realize that I've made a mistake. See how easy it is to do? I forgot that this is also a negative, okay? Which means this 5 over here is also a negative. So because I have a negative times a negative, I end up with a positive. So 5 times 5 is 25. And then on the bottom, 8 times 4 is 32. And that one's already in simplest form. Okay, so just like I did, I went back and I checked, did I get all my negatives in there? All right, let's do one more question. Let's solve something algebraically working with decimals. So here I have -3x equals -13.5. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide by -3. What you do to one side, you must do to the other. Again, notice that my negative symbol follows that 3. These guys cancel out. I get x equals -13.5 divided by -3. So, number on the top goes in the box. And then 3. Place your decimal above in your division question. 3 fits into 13 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12. Bring down the 5. 3 fits into 15 5 times. And I get 4.5. Now I'm going to think carefully about my negatives. Well, I had a negative divided by a negative, so therefore my answer is positive. Okay, so those are 4 sample questions for tomorrow's lesson. So you'll notice on tomorrow's lesson that each of these questions matches with a section that you need to work on. So it could be helpful for you to come back and review the video if you get stuck on a certain section, or you can chat with me or video call me. All right, I hope you have a great day, and then I hope you enjoy your Easter weekend.